Welcome to Great Taste. I'm your host, Steve Boss. 60 minutes of what I hope is going to be some delicious radio coming up. And if you're watching it, then we'll just make it delicious viewing also. My guest is Steve Sando. He is the founder and the everything behind Rancho Gordo. Rancho Gordo is located in California, and he is the man to turn to when we want to talk about beans, I think. And I think that's fair. There are other people we could talk to about beans, but I think he's the man to do that. And he's also someone who has a great focus on products that are indigenous to the New World or the Americas. And we want to hear about that. Now, before I actually say hi to Steve, I just want to say that I'm a big fan of Rancho Gordo. So it's trying to just making sure that all the information is out on the table here for everybody. I will tell you what my favorites are: cranberry, yellow eye, Christmas lima, royal corona. I love them all, but those are my particular favorites. And one other favorite, which is not in the bean category, but is the crimson popping corn, which is I want to just tell you, if you like popcorn, there is, in all my experience anyway, and it certainly doesn't cover every popcorn that exists, but I've never found a better one. I've never found a popcorn that is lighter, fluffier, tenderer, pops perfectly every single time, no matter how many times you do it. And okay, that's enough. Steve, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you. Sorry,
I introduced you when you.
Sorry, I just realized. Oh darn! I have to plug in. That's the kind of day we're gonna have. No, thank you so much. The other thing about the popcorn is it's moisture, and that's the thing that I get when I have regular popcorn. After that, It really tastes like cardboard, and it's kind of shocking. Yeah, but like most of the beans and that, our stuff's all new crop, so beans can live, hundreds of years really, and sometimes you can still cook them, and certainly for 10 or 15 years. But our beans are all new crop, so the goal was within 2 years, but we can't keep them in stock. So they're all within a year old, which is a nice problem. But
but you know what? It's a best. Well, I'll say from the consumer standpoint, it's got its pluses and minuses, because sometimes you'll get on the site and things will be out of stock. But at the same time, as a consumer, that those beans are about as fresh as you can possibly get them as far as fresh dried beans are concerned. So that's really good. And we can talk about why that's important at some point in our discussion. But could you just give us a little bit of background about, because you had a wide variety of we'll say, business experiences before you started Rancho Gordo. So how did this all add up and move to where it is today?
Well, I won't go through all of them, but I worked at Esprit, the clothing company, in the early 80s. So I think I learned branding there. I moved to Italy and actually had a radio show where I would pretend to make cocktails on the air. And I think I learned nerve there, because I'm not naturally an extrovert, believe it or not. And then the computers started to happen, and I started making a zine of music that I would have played on a radio show. And then that got picked up by Wired magazine. And then someone said, oh, you should be on this new thing called the internet. And all these things led to one another. And I just went in with gusto, but every time something happened to the point where it's like, this didn't work. And I remember I turned 40 and I thought, you are a screw up. And that wasn't the word I used, but this is like, you should get a garden and get a job at a superstore. And that's really what life has in store for you. And I thought, you know what? I think as long as I have a garden, I'm going to be okay. I always knew that instinctually. So although I had no gardening experience other than a few flowers in the front yard. So, I started gardening, but I was in Napa, and like many people, I erroneously found I had a talent because I could grow these amazing things, but it really was Napa. It wasn't me. But I would take my surplus to the farmer's market, and then that's how it started. And I started doing tomatoes because I was just obsessed with tomatoes, especially heirloom tomatoes at that point. But they were taking too long to ripen. I thought, well, I'll just do beans that'll carry me through until the tomatoes ripen. And of course, it's like, no, the beans were the story, not the tomatoes. And that's where I took it.
Now, go ahead.
I was saying, I also think being older, once it started to catch, I thought, I can't rewrite this story myself. I can't reinvent myself one more time. These are absolutely delicious. And the more I dug, the more interesting they were. So it's like, you know what, let's really do everything we possibly can to make this work. That was my thinking.
Did you have any type of real passion for beans before, or did it just grow naturally?
You know, in our house, I grew up in the Bay Area here near San Francisco, and our junk food night, and my mother was tired and did not feel like cooking, it was tacos. It was never like, I never had mac and cheese. You know, it didn't be judging, but I think I won because the tacos were a better bet. But we had, the best part about the tacos for me was always the canned refried beans. I just was obsessed with them.
Mm.
So there's that. And, you know, we grew up with burritos, and not really an Italian thing. It was really more a Mexican junk food thing that my mother offered. We're not Mexican, but that just was what we did. So I loved them and I liked them. Oh, and then, you know, in the early 80s, all of a sudden black beans were everywhere, and they seemed like the most exotic thing. And then they were so easy to make. And that was really like, I love these. And I was really snobby. It was like, oh, how do you eat pintos? Black beans are where it's at. And that's kind of where I left it. But I always liked them, but it was never a passion, I'd say.
And were you very much involved in cooking also, or not? Or was that something that also came along a little bit later?
Well, I mean, my wonderful mother was the worst cook and had no interest in it. She had Peg Bracken's I Hate to Cook book on everywhere.
I remember that.
Yeah, it was her Bible. She would actually never cook from it because that was too much trouble, but it was a warning, like, hang on, or I might open this book. And my father, who I ended up living with through high school, was actually a pretty good cook in his head. And but we always had lunch made for us, and he made dinner every night. So I enjoyed being, I mean, I think when I look back, he must have influenced me in that sense. And then as I got older, I think dinner parties are the height of civilization and fun. Like having 2 to 6 people around a table, shooting the breeze and eating great food and laughing. For me, that included dominoes and cocktails after dinner. It just was the most fun. So I think that's part of it. So it wasn't food as much as hosting, I'd say.
Okay.
But then food came.
Now I have to ask this question because I know you've either experienced it or other people have told you stories like this. I know myself, you know, people are always saying, like, you bring a dish to a dinner party, right? And somebody says, say it's a bean dish, right? And they say, oh, you should do a cookbook on beans, or you should open a restaurant and have beans as its focus because these beans are fantastic. Did anything like that ever happen to you when you were just starting to get going with your beans?
No. Well, in the very beginning, sadly, no one cared. I was the loneliest guy at the farmer's market. And people would literally come up and go, "Ooh, I love nuts. Ooh, beans," and then they'd walk away and not buy anything. So that happened a lot. So no, in the beginning though, there was none of that. In the 80s, when I was just having friends over, people said, "Oh, you should work in a restaurant." And I just thought the idea of giving up every Friday and Saturday night of your life, like, no, I'm not doing that.
Right.
Oh, and it also, you know, people's taste is really, I can't deal with it. Like, I really have my way of cooking, and I try, but there isn't any food I don't love. I mean, I'm able to eat almost everything. I really don't like rutabagas, but that actually doesn't come up much in life these days, so it's okay. But it's really hard when other people, like, I'm allergic to onions. I can't have cilantro. I mean, and now, you know, everyone has the meat things, although I think it's really easy to make great vegan food. So that one's not a good excuse anymore. But I was more interested in my good time than other people's. And, you know, Noel Coward said the common masses are just that. And I thought, oh, that's really true. I'm going to specialize in things instead of trying to appeal to everybody.
You know, I think it's dangerous for me to talk to you, honestly, because you just confirmed so many of my beliefs, and I already think that I have problems anyway because of that.
No, it's a gift. It's not a problem. I think also early on, I realized I'm never going to fit into the mainstream idea of success. Like, for, you know, just personally, professionally, it's got to be, I have to come in through the back door and do my own thing. But I love imposing my taste on other people. So if I'm successful, I've done that in a way. So when I first started, just no one was really cooking beans, and heirloom beans, people thought I was just trying to cash in on the heirloom tomato trend at the time. And it's like, no, I really love them. And if I could digress, at one point, Thomas Keller from the French Laundry came to the booth and he started buying beans, and all the other chefs wanted to know what he was doing. And I thought, oh, this is the real way to do this, because beans have been sort of a food co-op, health food store form of penance, not something fabulous. And it made me realize this needs to be approached as a great ingredient we've taken for granted. And the more I dug, that disproved itself to be true, because each variety had some value of some kind.
Mhm.
So I think that, to me, like revealing a secret, as long as you all know that I'm the one who revealed it, that's very important for my ego. But that really is where I get my kicks, I think.
Okay. So when you want to impose your taste preferences on someone, how does that actually, give me an example of how that occurs? Because I want to integrate these things into my own, activity here.
Well, but unfortunately, how you describe it. So when I was first at the farmers markets and describing the different beans, which were at that point bulk, so I had a scoop and I would weigh them. But everybody would come up and say, "Oh, have you seen that movie Amelie?" Which is a French movie where there's one scene where a girl sticks her hand in the bean basket. But then it was always into the thing, and I thought, I can't keep doing this. That's why we had to go with the packages, because it's like, oh, and even though you're boiling them, it was gross. But I would describe each bean, and I think at one point someone said, you're clearly from Napa, you're describing them almost like wine. But actually, people who got it really preferred that. Like, I didn't say they're really healthy, they're a superfood, they're super green. And I'd say, this one has a rich bean broth, this one has a thin skin. And when you describe them, hopefully you get good at it and you can get people excited about them. I also know, like, when we're on Instagram, which I don't think is a real important direct sales thing, but it does support the brand and people feel good about, oh, look what they're doing now. If we have a bowl of beans, which, believe it or not, aren't that photogenic, but if we drizzle a good amount of olive oil on them and there's pools of olive oil, we get so many likes, and people don't realize it, but they look juicy and delicious and indulgent. So little things like that, I think I like to influence. And then hopefully, I've now had some great experiences over 21 years, and by sharing them, I think people are, on board with it.
By the way, it's my turn to digress. Do you hear that dog barking?
I don't hear it. Is it yours?
Oh, great. No, it's not mine. It's my sister's. I'm at my sister's home. And my sister said before she left, "Would you like me to put the dog downstairs, lock the gate so that he won't bother you?" Now, I'm hoping that the mic is picking it up, but I think it probably is. So I'll just explain that to everybody so that when they hear the dog barking, everybody, since we started using Zoom several years ago, people are much more forgiving. I've had all kinds of interesting things happen during interviews.
You saw me have to plug in the computer because I realized, we're not going to make it. So
right.
Yeah,
that, unfortunately, I have to say that that's happened to me a couple of times. Anyway, all right. So let's talk about, I want to mention healthy just for a second, though, because I do think it's,
it's important. For sure.
Important. Yeah. I think that, people who are familiar with Blue Zones, for example, Dan Buettner and his work with National Geographic, and understanding that there was only one food that they found in common in all of the 6 areas that they identified where people lived longer, healthier, active, engaged lives, and that was beans. They were different kinds of beans, but they were beans. Yeah.
No, and it's so easy to incorporate them. It's kind of silly not to, especially if they have that. He's been really supportive of us, so it's been really nice. And he's written at least one great cookbook, and I think there's a new one coming out, and I love following what they're doing. I'll tell you, I haven't told anybody this yet because I'm working on this book, but I was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, and it was my A1C, which is the number they use, was 10.8. And if you know anything about it, 5.6 is normal. So it was like full on, not pre-diabetes. It was horrible. And they immediately want me to take a class to learn not to drink Coke. And it's like, I don't drink sodas. So but I do love my pasta. I'm a slob at night. There were a lot of lifestyle changes I felt I could make. So I said, I need you to give me 4 months. I'm begging the doctor to let me try and fix this with a diet and exercise. And they're like, I don't really like this at all. We'll give you 3 before you take the medicine. So I did a lot of research, and a lot of things will say don't eat beans because they're too high in carbs, but it's also, they're so high in starch, it balances it out. So I just told myself I'm going to exercise every day, which I was doing Zumba from a DVD and hikes. And then I said beans were free and nuts were free, and I'm not going to worry about my weight, because they kept saying, oh, if you lose weight, it's like, is the act of being fat causing the diabetes, or is it the lifestyle that led to the fatness? So I really thought, let's just try this. Well, it's been 4 years and my A1C now is 5.7. So I'm a smudge off of normal, and I cheat a tiny bit, but I did it without any drugs at all. And I'm not saying everybody can do that, but that was my experience.
Right.
So I'm actually going to write a book on Mexican food and diabetes, because a lot of Mexican Americans eat the worst of both worlds.
Yeah.
Whereas the pre-Hispanic diet is incredible. You know, it's wild greens, beans, chilies, corn, and, you know, meat on festival days. So it would be a great thing to figure out how to do. But anyway, health. That's why I don't know.
Well, no, that's very inspiring. I mean, that's incredibly inspiring.
I didn't lose any weight, but I think, you know, a lot of times you go to a doctor, it's like, well, you're fat, therefore that's why you're sick. And a lot of older women have this too. It's like, you're an old woman, this has happened to you, instead of actually digging deeper and finding out what the problems are. So you really have to be your own advocate. And, you know, if you need to take insulin, or if you think metformin is the answer for you, or if you want to do that as a security blanket, go ahead. But I was really strict the first 8 months and really had no rice or anything white, basically. So it's doable. And beans, I think, were great. And I have the most insanely healthy cholesterol levels, and I attribute that to the beans too. My doctor won't, but I do.
I tell you something, I have to say, I really do appreciate your sharing that, because so many people, there were numerous critical points that you made that are kind of way off of our topic today, but I just think I got to stick with it because of some experiences that I've been going through personally right now. And I think it's just important information to share for people that in the health system that we have today, and I don't want to get crazy and start, you know, going off on a long tangent, but you have to be your own advocate. You have to understand that you must be your own advocate. Your family members have to be part of that team, because the health system, and look at it as a system, not as, you know, this person is bad or this person is good. Just look at it as a system. It's set up in a certain way. It's running according to those parameters. And if you don't understand that it's critical for you to be your own advocate, you're done. You're toast. You're just going to be taking medication, as you found out, because that was what they wanted to do. And instead, what you did was, if I can just, you know, summarize it very clearly, you just said, you know what, I just want to try lifestyle changes, but I want to do my research myself. I want to look into it. I want to see, you know, exactly what this might mean. I feel like I have a good handle on my own physiology and what works for me. And I'm certainly willing, and I understand what you're saying, how critical it is and important it is for me to get this in hand. But I want to do it maybe from a different angle. I want to take a look from a different angle. And if it doesn't work, okay, I'll buy into, you know, this form of treatment. But
you're giving them a little more credit than I would. They never explained to me why it was serious. I don't even really understand what diabetes is, except for you have too much sugar in your blood or something like that. They never take it seriously. It's just, and they will tell you it's because the patients don't. So it's like, there's no point. And it's like, well, no, your job actually is to inspire the patients. I think is just as much. It's at least equal, if not even more on them, is what I would say. And metformin isn't a horrible drug with horrible side effects. I mean, a lot of people take it with no side effects at all. I just had dealt with my mother, you know, loved her medicine. So if there's any ailment, you take a pill. And if that has a side effect, you take another pill to take the side effect. I just thought I want to stay, as I was approaching my 60s, I thought I want to stay off that carousel as long as I can.
Yeah.
But if it were important, or if it was necessary, I would have taken, I'm not suggesting people don't take medicine, but absolutely. They kept, you know, pointing a finger and saying this is a lifestyle. So it's like, well, then let's fix it through lifestyle if we can.
Right. And that is, what's the good news about that is that more and more the medical profession is starting to, we'll say, wake up a little bit to that. You know, you have lots of advocates who, one person that I've talked to numerous times, Dr. Robert Lustig, who he says it's not what's in the food, it's what's been done to the food.
Hmm.
So what you're talking about, now we can bring it back to beans,
Yeah.
is you're talking about food that's been used, grown for literally what, maybe tens of thousands of years, cultivated,
Yeah.
and what is a staple of civilization's diets over these centuries, and has served them well as a whole food to integrate into the rest of their not only lifestyle but their eating habits.
Yeah. When I was at the farmers market, it was always funny getting older people who would come up and wistfully say, "Oh, do you have Jacob's cattle?" or some bean they ate during the Depression. And it was so interesting because they really loved it, which is interesting. But I think because of our success, we, meat, and more meat is going to make everybody happy and healthy. And it's funny, they have wistful memories of the Depression and eating beans. But it's very funny when you talk to younger people, they have none of the digestion garbage, the poor people garbage. They just think, oh, these are great. Oh, and this chef likes them. And that really is their point of reference. And sometimes it's me as their point of reference. It's like, wow, I think that is really successful.
Right. So can you describe a little bit about this journey once you started in on the beans, right? You started, this is something that's becoming more of a passion for you. You wanted to learn more about the different types of beans. And somewhere along in this journey, you moved way beyond your current geography and moved into studying what other, the Mexican civilization, pre-Mexican civilization, the indigenous peoples, Central America, this type of thing also. And one of the things that you mentioned, for example, is that in Italy, if I get this right, I'm trying to remember, that borlotti beans are tremendous, that's the cranberry bean, are a very integral part of Italian cuisine. And their ancestors come from Colombia, was that right?
We think so, yeah.
Yeah.
The Cargomonto bean, they believe. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, it's like the tomato was not in Italy pre-conquest. And like chilies weren't an Indian food. It's amazing what the Americas produced and how it really changed the way the world eats. So yeah, no, that was but my thinking was, I was in Napa. We know every variation of Italian grapes. We even know vinegars. And yet here, I remember eating this bean Rio Zappe and thinking, okay, this is actually from here. It's indigenous to the Americas. And we don't even know what it is. So my goal, I thought, I want every housewife to know how to use the Rio Zappe. So that was kind of what started things out. And I thought, we haven't been really great neighbors. I love the idea of thinking of the Americas, because I think we're staying, because so constantly being a pseudo Europe, which is an integral part of most of our lives, but it shouldn't be the only thing, because you're always going to be a bad copy if you try and do that too much, which is what we deal with here in Napa a lot. But anyway, I just thought the Americas, that's a much more romantic way of looking at this. And this is our food. So that's where I got started going.
Okay. And when you started looking into it, and I think, I wonder if this kind of dovetails with what we were talking about before, and the fact that, in current Mexican, for example, in Mexico in current times, type 2 diabetes is hugely, it's a huge problem on the rise, because their diet has strayed far away from the diets of the indigenous peoples that were there previously. And what type of bean culture did you find when you first,
Well, my idea of a good time would be to go to a market, or a tianguis, as they're called, and you usually have a bean section, and there's some nice things. And then around the periphery, usually is where the indigenous women would sit on a mat. And it's like, oh my God, Peter, I've never seen this bean. It's so beautiful. And I would buy them. I mean, that was my idea of fun. So I would try and see. And sometimes if it was a bigger farmer, I said, can I buy seed so I can grow this in the United States? Which apparently is the most offensive thing I could have done, because they understand that seed is the power. So they don't do that. So I met a young couple then. I mean, they're still young. Everyone's young compared to me, but they were exporting candy made from sour prickly pears. And I said, are there any heirloom beans in the area? And they're like, no, there's none. And the mother says, there's one in the village. So that started this whole thing, and they become sleuths, and there are beans everywhere. But just like here, we've just taken them for granted, and they're right underneath our nose. We're just not doing anything. So then what happens often is I'll fly down, they'll pick me up at the airport in their truck, and we'll just start going. So it's either Veracruz or Oaxaca or Michoacan, and we go to the markets. And if we see a great bean, Gabrielle, who's darker, goes in first, because if they see me, they just shut down completely. It's like, oh yeah, this is going to work out in my favor. I don't think so. And then we start talking, and then we see about them, and they grow for us now. So we actually buy their crops. And the more savvy farmers are like, well, you want them cheap so we can compete with China or Peru, right? And they're like, no, we actually want your grandmother's beans, and we want to pay market value. And this just really isn't part of their reality. So it takes a long time to create these relationships. But we've been doing this since late 2008. So, and we keep going back, and you just see villages where first they look better, but more importantly, there's men in them. The men aren't coming up here because there's work. And it's like, if this is all it took, it's shocking. I mean, this is a drop out of the bucket. I mean, imagine if we did something culturally relevant. If we, instead of, well, I don't want to get too political, but we could invest in this kind of thing where we have opportunities to help them stay where they want to stay. They're not coming up here for cable because it's so good.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's it. But I also have to say, people think we're producing in Mexico. About 15% of our productions in Mexico. Most of it is California, and then the rest is on the West Coast, except for one being in Italy. I mean, Poland.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, based on what you told me just now, or just told us, I wanted to know this particular project that you have. Is that different than? I don't know how to pronounce it, so I'm not going to.
No, it's the Rancho Gordo Shishak project, and their company is Shishak, and Choconosle are sour prickly pears. So I didn't want to just take credit, like, oh, look, we have Rancho Gordo has these beans. I really wanted to incorporate them into the name of the thing, which is what we did. And it's been wildly successful to the point where I just went to Alabama and did a cornbread workshop with the chef Scott Peacock. And he also does biscuits and gravy and plain biscuits. And we met different people, and we're actually going to take that model for young Black farmers in Alabama and have them grow field peas that are heirloom. And it's like, oh, this is so, and to a young person in Alabama, I mean, there's not a lot of opportunities if you're, working class, and farmers love to farm, but they don't understand, like, actually, most of the field peas would be fresh. So it's like, no, actually they're fabulous dried, and this is an opportunity. And we know black-eyed peas, most people, but there are dozens and dozens of really great varieties. So we're working with them, securing the land and helping them get equipment and get this thing going. So the first stuff should go in the spring.
Nice.
Yeah,
nice.
It is. And there's a role for charity for sure. And I just drives me crazy. I just find nonprofits slow and ponderous. It's like, I think what I could do though is help create opportunities. So rather than give money to some group that means well, it's like, no, this is small business to small business, and I'm treating you like an adult. I'm doing this all at market value. There's no charity, but we're providing an opportunity, and it's not for everybody, but for the ones that get it, I think it's worth more than anything.
I think that what you're describing is something that makes me feel like these people, and I don't want to say because I'm not in that particular situation, but I would feel like it's a total gift of empowerment is what it is, as opposed to anything else. That's like the richest part of the process, I think.
Yeah. And, I'm not sure what I am. I guess, capitalism isn't feeling really comfortable right now, but it is a system we have. So how do you become the best capitalist you can be? Right. So that's kind of been my goal.
Yeah. And Steve, it was funny when you were talking, I was thinking about an interview I did many years ago with Sean Askenozzi from and he was talking about the first time he went down to a grower that he had begun a relationship with direct, like you were talking about, your thing, and he brought his spreadsheets down. and showed this grower, well, here's how much we bought, here's how much we sold, here's what our profit margin was, and here's how much I'm going to pay you. And he said they looked at him like he was totally out of his mind.
Yeah, no, I'm sure. So sweet. The first time we did this, it was a farmer named Abel, and we had agreed to buy. He didn't want to do it for years because he finally just said, well, what am I going to have? It's like, oh, no, you should keep the seed and keep growing and have enough for you. We're buying the excess. And he really didn't understand that concept. Mm-hmm. So we had them put them up on a pallet. We went to get it, and we just said, we want to confirm the price. So he had a calculator, and he just started bawling and handed it to his sister. He couldn't believe how much money he was making. And it's like, oh my God, this is nothing. I mean, it's what we waste. I mean, Kim Kardashian's hair product budget could cover this in a week, I think. It's like, wow, it really doesn't take much. So for me, that's where I get a kick. So that's one of my fun things to do.
Sure.
And everybody wins because they get a good price. They don't have to worry about taking the stuff to market, and we get introduced to these incredible beans that we wouldn't know anything about.
And then consumers win.
In Napa, I wouldn't say it's racist, but we have working class Mexicans and upper middle class white people, and it seems like that's the entire rainbow of diversity that we enjoy. But like old, I would say, blue rinse ladies, which isn't really true because no one does that anymore. But there's a certain older, less taller person who's coming in asking for the beans from Michoacan, and it's like, wow, that is really wonderful. So food is a great non-political bridge for everybody, and that's been really fun.
Yeah. So keeping that in mind, why should consumers at the very basic, just the most basic level, why should they consider spending money on heirloom beans as opposed to buying beans in a bag that's on the grocery store shelf, that type of thing? What's the difference?
The heirlooms are harder to grow, so therefore they're higher priced. It's not like a boutique thing. But they have, so this real zape we talked about, I remember eating it, and the first time I was like, well, this is sort of like a pinto, but there's hints of chocolate, there's hints of coffee. The bean broth is like free soup. And these are the extra things you get. But I will say there's a place for commodity beans. It's really cheap protein for the masses. So I'm not a snob in that way. And there are fine commodity black beans and pintos and things like that. Kidney beans I find insipid, but there are other ones that are okay. So, but with heirlooms you get really different flavors and different factors involved. And like I say, it's the other thing about, not buying canned too, which I used to be a canned bean user somewhat, is most recipes, if you're using canned beans, will tell you to rinse the muck off the beans, which is so gross. And when you cook your beans, that liquid you're cooking them in is cold, and you can reuse it to make soups. You can cook, if you have a lot of extra, you can cook rice with it, or even, a scoopful with the water to make rice, or mix it with chicken broth and pureed tomatoes, and it's a soup. You're done. So it's like you get so many extra things with it, is what I would say.
Mm-hmm. And the other thing is that I think that I want to go back to something you said earlier when you talked about when you were describing the beans. This is, if people look at your packaging, these are the same words that you use, on the packaging to describe what it is that you're going to find when you cook these. Like, this is a thick skin, or this is a thin skin, and this is creamy. All these different types of adjectives that are give you a really good idea of what to expect. And this is another thing that you wrote. This is on your website. As you cook these heirloom beans and other grains and ingredients, keep in mind that we have a common culture with Mexico and the rest of the Americas. What you are doing isn't exotic and esoteric. It's continuing traditions that are well established for a reason. I think most of us who are immigrants to the Americas are staying. So rather than constantly trying to reproduce English gardens or European wine, it's nice to know what's from here and discover ways of incorporating these ingredients into your kitchen. New World food is exciting, tasty, healthy, romantic, and possibly easier on the earth. So there are multiple dimensions besides just the taste factor.
No, for sure. I'm yeah, that's very good. I'm glad I wrote that. All right. We tend not to. Is that from the website?
Yes.
Yeah, we don't. We're trying to veer away from New World now because we had indigenous people say, "New World." I mean, it's not new. We were here when you came. So then so we're just actually now just Rancho Gordo, and I do say food in the Americas, but and that's the other thing. Everybody now needs to be called their own thing or their own pronouns. And it's like, you know what? God bless you. I'm going to try my hardest. You have to cut me some slack as I go through this process. I'm willing to do it, but you got to be a little gentle with me as I try.
I am so totally on your wavelength. I just, anyway.
Yeah.
So I want to read another thing from the website because I think it's awesome because I want to talk a little bit about cooking beans. And this is what you wrote. Cooking beans is like making martinis because when someone finally masters it, they insist their way is the only way. So you just have to nod and smile and say, "Oh, that sounds great." It's really not as complicated as everyone makes it.
No, it's true. No, I even say it's simmer till done. That's how you make beans. Just simmer them until they're cooked. That is most pure.
Mm-hmm.
But it is like you, as a home cook, have taken this little rock and turned it into something creamy, and you think you're God. You've just done this miracle, and so people need to listen to your way. And part of it is to reinforce to you what has just happened. But the reality is, there's no one way. There's all roads lead to Rome. You can figure it out. Like some people. I believe in making my life as difficult for myself as possible. So I cook in clay pots on my stove, and it takes a little bit longer, but it's twice as much fun. Other people have their Le Creuset that they got for their wedding and have never used for anything. And okay, now I'm going to do this. And that's a great one. And then, more and more people are using the Instant Pot and pressure cooking. And they're all completely different. And some people, insist you soak, and other people say it doesn't matter. Some people say when you soak, you have to change the water, which most of your Italian grandmothers will tell you. But then food scientists will tell you you're possibly throwing out vitamins and flavor. So, and whatever you're doing to help for digestion is so minimal that it's not even worth it. Mm-hmm. So there's lots of ways to get there. So if someone is insisting their way, just like I said, smile and think, "Oh, thank you." But I actually do make the best gin martini, so that you should listen. When I give you those instructions, that is not to be messed with. So
okay, well, I am going to read what you have written on your website about cooking beans because I think that it covers everything that you just said. Sometimes I soak, often I don't. When I'm in a real hurry, I'm happy to use a pressure cooker. If I want to have beans when I come home from the office, a slow cooker has been dependable, and the aroma when I open the door makes me pretend the staff has been working all day for my benefit. Best of all is Sunday when I have friends coming over for dinner and can lovingly cook some heirloom beans in a clay pot to share with them. So I think that we covered all those options.
It's all true too. I'm not just making this up. I mean, that really is my way. The pressure cooker is my least favorite way, but it has been the way. There was this perfect storm right before COVID. For Christmas, everybody got an Instant Pot, and everybody got Joe Yonan of the Washington Post book called Cool Beans, and everybody was getting Rancho Gordo beans. So we blew, and we were featured on a show called CBS Sunday Morning, which I had never heard of in my life. And everyone was like, "It is the best show on TV." And I'm like, "Oh yeah, whatever." I said, "We should probably do a couple hundred extra gift boxes because no one's going to be watching this show." And so that one day we had 16,000 orders. I was like, "Oh my gosh, this is wild." So, but anyways, there was this perfect storm, and then there was COVID, and people now had all these beans and all these instructions. So we did really well. And the Instant Pot was definitely part of that. But I have a pressure cooker, a stovetop pressure cooker, and it's not as easy because you don't just push buttons, but it's so much faster because I don't know. But you should do what makes you that works. And and I have a lot of people that insist on soaking and then throwing out the water. It's like you're still miles ahead of someone opening a can or not eating beans at all.
Right. And so I just want to corroborate your process because, as I told you before we started the conversation that we're recording here, I just do it by time, basically. How much time do I have? How much effort do I want to put in? And then I can decide my cooking method. I'll second your clay pot because I love cooking in that type of vehicle because I just like the way it feels. It has this quality of the texture of the look of the pot, the feel of it, the way it feels when you stir, all those things. I think whether it adds anything to the bean, to the final product, I have no idea, but it adds to my enjoyment of the process. And I would say for people, if you can find ways to, whatever it is that allow you to enjoy the process more, you're gonna find that you're going to really enjoy the final product more too. So
yeah. Well, I will say in clay, it's really hard to burn the beans. I used to, when I was doing farmers markets, would make beans on Friday night in order to have them to sample for the weekend. And it's a hard life. I mean, you're up at 5 or earlier, you go to these markets, and I would always like pass out. And then all of a sudden I'd smell burnt beans from the regular pot. And I'd wake up with the smell of burning beans. So then I switched to clay, and it never happened. It was amazing. You just really have to work hard. You can do it, but you have to work really hard. I think it's also interesting. Every great cuisine, like the French, the Italians, the Mexicans, even in India, they, Greeks and Middle Eastern, they all use clay pots for beans. There's just this universal, like, no, I think the beans love the clay pots. And if they're unglazed, they're even better. Paula Wolfert talked about unglazed clay pot cooking. And she said it retains the memory of everything you ever put in it. And it's very romantic. So that's fun. But it's hardly necessary.
Now, from a practical standpoint, it also, I have to say, sometimes it retains the memory so well if you cook the same types of, put the same type of spices in, that you have to have more than one clay pot.
No. And that's a fun problem to have too. No. And like I have some, they're taganas, they're called Tagra, and they're Moroccan for fish. And you really don't want to put anything other than fish in them because it does have that memory.
Right.
Yeah. But I was going to say, the reason I'm complaining about the pressure cookers, other than the Instant Pot to me is slow and pokey, but part of cooking the beans is you have some evaporation of the liquid. So the air is mixing with the beans as they evaporate. And then the bean broth is great. When you open the lid off a pressure cooker, whether it's an Instant Pot or a stovetop, there's just a deadness to the bean broth. So Deborah Madison, thank you. I love to drop names. She told me what she likes to do is do 20 minutes under pressure, do a natural release, which on an Instant Pot could be quite long, but on a regular pressure cooker is probably about 10 minutes. And then take the lid off and then turn the heat on and let it continue cooking for another 20 minutes. And then within an hour, you still have beans, but just that last 20 minutes of meeting the air and doing its work really makes them much better, I think.
And I have to say, what I notice is that there's just, which is the same thing that you just said, really, there's a lack of depth to the product. And so that's one of the reasons why my wife always says, no, don't use the Instant Pot. And
I think the Instant Pot has a simmer function. So you could remove the lid and put it on simmer.
You could do it all in there.
20 minutes and see how that goes.
But I also find that I like to just be with the foods that I cook and to spend as much time with them as possible. And other people may not, they may not have the time, and B, they may not have that kind of maybe silly notion. But for me, that's what works, and that's what gives me enjoyment. So I find that with beans, I'm always kind of tasting numerous times just to see where it's at, whether that broth has that fullness, that richness that I want out of it. And what's amazing to me is when you use the different types of beans, everything is different. Every dish that you're cooking, if you're cooking, because usually what we're doing at home is we're cooking a pot of beans, and we're using it either as usually we're using it as soup. I'll just say, usually that's it, or we're using it maybe pasta fagioli with borlotti or something like that. But I think that the draw for me, and I bet for lots of people, is the fact that when you eat this food, it fills you up on a physical level, and it also fills you up on another level too, because it has this richness to it that maybe people associate with other types of foods, like maybe meats or whatever. But really, beans have an amazing richness to them in terms of their, not just their taste, but their texture and just how they, it's a feel good item. I guess that's what I want to say. It may sound strange, but I mean, that's just what it is. It's got that, there's that, maybe it's something to do with the fact that these are foods that are thousands and thousands of years old, and they have all this in their memory, essentially.
Yeah. And it tastes indulgent. Like it tastes creamy. It tastes like it's really can't be that good for me. And yet it is. So that's fun. And, Mexican refried beans are one of the greatest things on the planet. But if you just have leftover beans, I did it this morning, hoping for leftovers, but they're gone. But I had actually Christmas limas. Did you mention those earlier?
I did.
And they're called Christmas limas because they have a chestnut texture. And there's an association with chestnuts at Christmas. So I had some left over. I only had a day or two left before they were going to turn. So I put the immersion blender in the pot as I was heating them and thinking, well, this is going to lose whatever wonderful thing they had because I'm ruining the texture. It didn't. So just here's a little. So anyway, but pureed beans, you don't have to use lard and onions and do a whole show in order to have something. Just pureed beans are fabulous, is what I guess my long-winded way of saying it is. And if you're doing chestnut limas or Christmas limas, which I would never have thought of, normally it's like they actually retain that lovely graininess that you get with chestnuts.
Nice. I have to mention that my son is also a huge Rancho Gordo fan, and he actually has he's probably tasted most of the different beans that you guys grow, and he is always giving me little tidbits of information about, oh, here's what I did with these and here's what I did with those. And it's so inspiring actually to talk to somebody who gets so excited. I love talking to people who get excited about food, because most of the time you're talking to people who are like, oh, I don't want to spend any time cooking.
Right. Well, and you have your son, but I have my children also. I have kids, but my real children are the beans. And I have a distinct idea of what they should be doing and how people should be cooking with them. And when people come back, it's like, oh my God, that's better than I ever could have thought of. And I'm, kind of a critical snob sometimes. And it's just great when people come back and say, you haven't thought of this. This is really great. And I love that. We have a bean club and the members share what they're doing. And sometimes it's not great, but then other times it's like, wow, you put me to shame. That is so good. And I love that. It makes me very happy.
Right.
Shown up.
It's an interesting type of circumstance that comes up when you have these kinds of sharing things. And you and I were talking about how we're kind of, both of us, maybe we have a little bit of a attitude about food and cooking and what tastes good and what doesn't and all that kind of stuff. And when you open it up for everybody to communicate, I feel the same, way. It's like, I don't really
know. How great when they prove you wrong. That I think that's really nice to be able to accept that. Oh my God.
Yeah. Where do you see Rancho Gordo going in the future? Do you see more projects like this collaborative project that you're doing with the field peas?
But and I just see now, after all this time, there's a whole new generation that we didn't hit because we're not mainstream. Like when I hear a new cook talk about cooking beans and talking about things that we've been talking about for 20 years, it's like, oh, we have to start all over. This is great. But I'm lucky to have the opportunity to start all over. No, I think, an outreach towards younger people would be the kind of a goal. And we have a lot of the staff is younger and they've been like pushing me to do TikTok. It's like, I've done it all. I can't do TikTok too. So they're actually going to do TikTok. And because I'm not that audience. Like I don't need a 30-second recipe. I'm perfectly happy reading about the nuances and stuff. But I said, it would be actually funny if you said, these are things that would drive Steve crazy, but we're going to do it anyway. And then you go ahead and do it. So I like that idea. That's fun.
Mm-hmm. And let's talk a little bit about some of the other stuff, because you don't just sell beans. I mean, we talked about popcorn already, right? So I've had one of your hot sauces. I have two different oreganos that I use, dried oreganos. One's a Mexican oregano, and the other one I forget off the top
We
of my
call
head.
it oregano Indio.
Okay.
And there, when the conquest happened, there were no true oreganos in the New World or the Americas. So the Spanish just called anything green oregano.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not true oreganos, but they're actually incredibly healthy and delicious.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So there are probably 15 different varieties of it.
Okay. And so there are numerous other products that you sell. You sell some, besides popcorn, you sell, polenta, I think, and there are some other things. But is your Esprit background what drives all the merchandise?
No, what drives it is like, what do I want? And that's really when I started with Rancho Gordo. It's like even with the label, it's like when I open my pantry, what do I want to look at? What would make me happy? And so I love Anson Mills, which is they're the people who brought back Carolina Gold Rice, and they're I don't know which Carolina. I think they're in North Carolina. I'm not sure.
Oh, they're off of South Carolina coast.
South. Okay, I don't know. It's like, I just went to LA, and to me, it's like anything south of Bakersfield's LA, and people in Pasadena are very offended by that. And to me, anything east of Georgia is the South. I guess I don't know. So I'm very California, unfortunately, in that. But I love what they're doing. I've loved it. And even though they grow beans, I don't see it as competition at all. In fact, it's super. So we become, virtual friends, and we talked about doing polenta. And so we're doing that. So we get a shipment. They're really picky in a funny way, which is really to everyone's benefit in the end. The goal isn't to turn a profit immediately. The goal is to produce the best cornmeal they can. So they will only grind it, I think, on Monday. So you have to have your order in by Friday, and then they grind to order. So that's what we do. And that's why we do sell out, but it's never for very long. And I love working with them. And it's notably one of the best cornmeals, polentas you can buy. And it's very different from Mexican corn, because that's been slaked with calcium hydroxide, or it becomes nixtamal. So it's a completely different animal. Mm-hmm. So it's fun.
Unfortunately, we've almost run out of time here, and I want to just ask you: have you seen? I'm curious as if you've seen any additional, we'll say, spillover effects from the work that you and your company have been doing in Mexico over the last number of years, that with encouraging growers to do what they do and working directly with them, and the economic value that has happened as a conclusion, for them, who becoming more empowered, more economically viable as families, and maybe this happening with other industries also, where people are beginning to have the opportunities to work more directly, and therefore set up a more substantial economic base for their cultures?
I'm not. I don't know. Sorry. I would love that, but I don't see it. But that just means it might be happening, and I don't think I have that much influence. So I among the people we're working with, yes, I'd say all that is happening, and they are empowered, and they are doing their own thing, and they're really thinking along different lines. But I don't know for other things.
Right. Yeah. I see these types of projects going on with cacao, for example, in certain areas, with coffee in other areas. And I just feel like it must all be part of, just a more comprehensive approach that companies like yourselves and others have been taking, where they've realized that this is a way to not only get great product and bring it to other people's awareness, but it's a way to also substantially create, to, we'll say, an area or a country's economic growth, and make that a more viable opportunity.
I don't think it's because of me, but there's a spice company called Burlap and Barrel who we're buddies, but I don't think it's because of me, but they're kind of doing the same thing.
Yes, exactly.
Thing. But I would credit myself.
I think that's what I'm talking about. I think there's a real energy that's been going on now for, say, maybe the last 15, 20 years, where this is becoming, I hate to say it this way, but I will, a more new age way of doing business, where instead of just the growth of multinationals, you have the growth of small companies like yourselves working directly with suppliers and building a business that not only is viable for you, but at the same time, it builds business and economic viability for others in where you're getting the products, and especially where those products haven't, we'll say they've been markets where people have been, we'll say, taken advantage of economically for generations, essentially.
I would hope so. I think it's such a great idea. And, it does seem like multinational corporations now aren't just happy with good, healthy profits. They have to be obscene profits in order for it to be you're a winner. But if more and more companies are doing this, I was involved with a couple of nonprofits and trade group things, and I just realized, what, I just have to do my own thing. I can't keep talking about it and doing nothing, or doing the work and then someone else getting all this credit for doing nothing. So I don't know. I just have to be my own thing, if that makes sense. And it's a luxury. I totally am thrilled that I get to do it. But,
sure. Sure. Makes
but
total
we're
sense.
actually working with chocolate too. It's funny. We have a woman who, in her village, if you like a boy and you intend to get married, you have to make this chocolate for the mother-in-law. And then this woman who didn't even speak Spanish, Araceli, she took a course in QuickBooks, and she said, "Oh, what if I made chocolate and made it the dummy corporation for it?" So she did it, and that's our chocolate now. And it started out with just 3 women, and now I think there's like 20 women making this chocolate. And this is what's so great. So I know you want to. A clay comal is pan. She insists on roasting the chocolate on the clay with a wood-fired oven, and that's what affects the flavor. And then she grinds it with just cinnamon and piloncillo, which is unrefined sugar, and not very much of that. And it takes forever, and it's not cheap, but that's the way you should do this, and that's what she does. Her name's on it, so it's pretty cool.
I am so glad that you were able to share that with us before we had to close. So thank you so much. Yeah. Steve, what a real pleasure. Steve Sando from Rancho Gordo. You can find ranchogordo.com as where all the beans and the other products are. And you're in select retailers around the country too, aren't you?
Yeah, for sure.
Great. So thanks again.
It's been fun. Anytime.
You've been listening to Great Taste. Maybe you've been watching Great Taste. I'm your host, Steve Boss. 60 minutes of deliciousness.